The wind came down from the mesas like a scream from the dead. Dust curled through the canyons, clawing at the sky, and a lone horsewoman pressed against the storm. Her name was Evelyn Marris, a 30-year-old widow whose life had been nothing but noise gunfire, church bells, and the empty laughter of men she'd long stopped trusting. She'd been riding since dawn, away from a town that had turned its back on her. Her husband had died 2 winters ago, but the gossip about her, how she lived alone, how she sold whiskey, how she looked a man in the eye, never died with him. When the sheriff threatened to burn her saloon after she refused to marry decent, she took her saddlebags, her pistol, and what remained of her pride, and headed west, but west had its own ghosts dot by the time the sun fell. Her horse was trembling, and the horizon had vanished in rain. That's when she saw the faint glow of a fire deep among the rocks. She hesitated. No one sane rode near Apache country after nightfall, but the cold bit harder than fear. She rode toward it, hand near her revolver. The firelight revealed a man sitting cross-legged before a cave. His hair was black as obsidian, long and wet, braided with beads that shimmered like forgotten stars. His chest was bare, marked with faint scars that glowed like pale lightning under the stormlight. His eyes rose slowly from the flames to meet hers. He didn't move, didn't mean to trespass. Evelyn said, voice steady though her heart stumbled, "Just need to rest my horse." He studied her for a long moment before answering, his voice low, calm yet carrying something ancient beneath it. "You're far from the white man's road," he said, "and closer to graves than to town." Evelyn dismounted, defiant even in fear. "Then maybe I'll find peace among your ghosts," she muttered, leading her horse toward the rocks. The Apache's gaze softened. He motioned toward the fire. "The wind will kill you out there." She hesitated again, then stepped into the circle of warmth. The rain hissed at the fire's edge, and steam rose between them like smoke between 2 worlds. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the crackle of wood filled the silence. Evelyn's clothes clung to her like ice, and she rubbed her hands near the flames. Her eyes caught his again, steady, unreadable, the kind of eyes that carried both kindness and warning. "You're not afraid?" he finally asked. "I've lived through worse than weather," she said. "Besides, fear's a habit. I quit it." He almost smiled. Almost. "My name is Kehasti Redmoon," he said quietly. "Once a warrior, now something else." Evelyn tilted her head. "What's something else mean?" He poked the fire with a stick, watching sparks leap like spirits. "A man who walks without a tribe. A ghost that still breathes." Evelyn understood more than she wanted to. She looked into the flames, seeing her own exile reflected there. 2 outcasts, one cast out by people, the other by destiny, sharing a fragile warmth between storms. After a while, he rose and handed her a blanket made of animal hide. "You'll need this," he said. She hesitated before taking it. "You don't trust me?" "I trust the night less." She smirked faintly, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "Fair." Lightning split the sky, and the cave trembled. She startled, hand on her gun. He didn't move. His calmness was unnatural, almost otherworldly. Then she noticed something carved into the stone near where he sat, symbols. Circles and the shape of a woman's face etched deep into the rock. "Who is she?" Evelyn asked. Kehasti's jaw tightened. His voice came out hoarse, as if dragged from somewhere buried. "Someone I should have saved. Someone I still hear when I close my eyes." Silence settled again, heavier this time. The storm outside howled like it was mourning with him. Evelyn looked at him, unsure why her chest felt tight. "You've been out here a long time, haven't you?" He met her gaze through the flickering light, his voice quiet, stripped of pride. "I haven't slept beside a woman since the years," he said. "And I don't know if I ever will again." The words lingered like smoke. Evelyn turned toward the fire, pretending the heat on her face came from the flames and not from something deeper stirring inside her. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, two souls, one scarred by battle, one scarred by memory, sat in the glow of an uncertain night, unaware that fate had just begun to move its hand. When dawn came, it came slowly, like the desert was unsure whether to live again after such a storm. The fire had long gone to ashes, but the scent of smoke lingered in the cave. Evelyn Marris stirred beneath the animal hide, her body stiff, her heart uneasy. She wasn't used to sleeping in safety, least of all beside a stranger who didn't speak much. Kehasti Redmoon was already awake, standing near the mouth of the cave, his back to her. The morning sun washed over his skin, lighting the faint scars that crossed his shoulders, marks that looked more like stories than wounds. He was still as a carved stone, watching the horizon like a man waiting for something that might never come. Evelyn rose quietly, brushing the dust from her trousers. "You always wake this early?" He didn't turn. "In the wild, sleep too long, and the world forgets you're alive." She smirked faintly. "Guess that explains why I never fit in town. The world tried to forget me before I even left." Kehasti finally turned to face her. His eyes held that same steady calm, the kind that saw more than words could admit. A woman who rides into Apache lands alone must have ghosts chasing her. "More like men," she said dryly, tightening her belt. "Cowards with badges, tongues sharper than knives." A shadow crossed his face. "And yet you still ride. That is something." She shrugged. "You survive or you don't. I just keep doing the first part." For a while, silence hung between them again. Then Kehasti stepped back into the cave and began packing his few belongings: flint, a bone knife, a pouch of herbs. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man who measured every motion against memory. Evelyn watched him, curiosity gnawing at her. "You live out here alone? No tribe, no family?" "I had both," he said, voice low. "They are buried with the fire I lit." Her heart stilled at the sorrow in his tone. "What happened?" He met her eyes briefly, and the answer was there: violence, loss, perhaps betrayal, but he didn't speak of it. Instead, he motioned toward the open desert. "If you travel south, the land flattens. There's a river, good for horses. You can follow it to the town of Whitestone. Safer roads." Evelyn tilted her head. "You trying to get rid of me already?" A faint flicker of something, maybe amusement, maybe pain, touched his mouth. "You're not built for this land. It breaks what it keeps." "Maybe that's why I belong here," she shot back. He studied her a moment longer, then nodded slowly, as if accepting that she was not one to be saved against her will. They left the cave together, the desert spreading before them like an open wound. The air smelled of wet dust and sagebrush. Evelyn's horse whinnied softly, nudging her arm, while Kehasti's Mustang waited by the rocks, a dark, silent creature that looked half wild like its master. As they rode, the landscape came alive, hawks circling high above, distant thunder rumbling where the mountains met the clouds. It was beautiful in the way loneliness could be. After an hour they reached the dry bed of a stream. Kehasti dismounted, crouching to touch the cracked mud. "Water ran here last night," he said. "The land remembers even when the river is gone." Evelyn knelt beside him, her voice soft. "You talk like the earth listens." "It does," he said simply. "Everything that breathes listens. Even the dead." She looked at him, trying to read the man behind the mystery. "You don't talk like any man I've met." "That's because I'm not one of them," he said, his eyes dark as thunderclouds. Before she could ask more, a sound split the stillness, the faint echo of hoofbeats. Both froze. Kehasti's hand went to the knife at his belt. Evelyn drew her revolver. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, white men, rough-looking, their horses wet with sweat. Bandits or bounty hunters, she couldn't tell. But when one lifted a rifle, she knew the answer didn't matter. "Looks like we found her," one of the men called. Sheriff said she'd be heading west. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Kehasti's expression didn't change, but his stance shifted, calm, coiled, ready. "You know them?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," she said, cocking her gun. "They came to finish what the sheriff started." He looked at her once, then toward the rising sun. "Then stay close to the fire, Evelyn Marris." "Fire?" she whispered, confused. He pointed to the horizon where the sun blazed between the clouds. "That's where my spirit lives. And that's where I fight." Then he turned toward the riders and began walking forward slow, fearless, like a man who had already seen death and made peace with it. Evelyn swallowed hard, the wind carrying her heartbeat in her ears. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing. Kehasti Redmoon wasn't just a man. He was a storm in human form, and she had just chosen to ride beside it. The sound of approaching hoofbeats tore through the morning calm like a rip in the sky. Evelyn Marris crouched behind a boulder, revolver steady in her hands, heart drumming like thunder in her chest. Dust rose from the ridge where 3 riders came into view, men with rifles slung low and hatred in their eyes. Beside her, Kehasti Redmoon stood tall and silent, the desert wind catching the strands of his long black hair. Shirtless, the sun gleamed off the scars that told his history marks from blades, bullets, and things far older than both. He didn't seem afraid. He didn't even blink. Evelyn hissed, "You planning to fight them with that knife?" Kehasti glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Knives don't miss when the heart guides them." "Yeah, well, hearts don't stop bullets," she shot back. The riders drew closer, fanning out. The man in front, a thick-shouldered brute with a red scarf and a grin full of rot, called out, "You can't hide forever, Marris. Sheriff's orders alive if you're quiet, dead if you ain't." Evelyn's hand tightened on the trigger. She remembered that voice. Colt Durner. He'd been the sheriff's hired hound, a man who laughed while burning down her saloon. Kehasti stepped forward, placing himself between her and the ridge. "Stay low," he said calmly. She bristled. "I can handle." "Do it," he said, and something in his tone made her obey. The first shot cracked across the canyon. A bullet sparked off stone inches from her face. Kehasti moved like wind over fire, swift, impossible. He darted behind one rock, then another, the bandits cursing as they lost sight of him. Evelyn peeked out, saw nothing but the blur of movement and dust. A cry split the air. One of the riders tumbled from his horse, an arrow protruding from his shoulder. Another gunman turned, shouting. A second arrow struck his rifle clean from his hands. Evelyn's breath caught. Arrows? Kehasti reappeared behind a ridge, bow in hand, one carved from ash wood and bone. He notched another arrow, drew, and let fly. The last rider tried to aim but never got the chance. The arrow grazed his cheek and buried deep into his hat, sending him tumbling backward. Silence fell, except for the distant whinny of spooked horses. Evelyn rose, revolver still ready, eyes wide with disbelief. "You? You could have killed them all." "I don't kill unless the spirits demand it," he said, lowering his bow. "Let them crawl back to their sheriff with fear in their mouths." She stared at him, panting, trying to calm the wild rush of adrenaline. "You saved me." He met her gaze. "No, I saved balance. You just happened to be in its shadow." Despite herself, she laughed a raw, exhausted sound. "That's your way of saying you don't like admitting it, huh?" His eyes softened slightly. "You speak too freely, woman." "I've been told worse," she replied, holstering her gun. They retrieved the horses and moved on, riding until the sun was high and cruel. The land shimmered under the heat, stretching endlessly. By afternoon, they reached a cluster of rock formations shaped like giant teeth biting the sky. Kehasti stopped there, dismounting. "We'll rest here," he said. Evelyn slid down, her muscles aching. "You always travel this quiet?" "Yes," he said, kneeling to refill his water pouch from a trickling stream between stones. "Words invite spirits. Silence keeps them guessing." She chuckled softly. "If that's true, I've probably haunted a few hundred men by now." He looked at her, then not with judgment, but with something closer to understanding. "Maybe that's why you're still alive." For a long moment, they said nothing. The air shimmered, carrying the scent of sage and sweat. A hawk circled overhead. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "Why did you really help me, Kehasti? You could have left me to those men." He leaned back against the rock, his face unreadable in the shadow. "Because I saw someone who still fights even when the world has already buried her. My people called such a soul Tashani, one who stands against the wind." Her throat tightened. "That what you were once? A Tashani?" He stared at the horizon, eyes distant. "I was a warrior once. A protector. Until the day I failed." "Failed who?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. His fingers brushed the turquoise pendant hanging at his chest. "Her name is not for this wind to carry." Evelyn watched him in silence, feeling the ache behind his words. There was grief there, old, raw, and buried deep beneath his calm. She wanted to ask more, but something in his eyes told her that night would bring its own truths. As the sun bled into the desert, she realized something unsettling. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the land, not even of what waited beyond tomorrow. Because somehow, against all sense and reason, Kehasti Redmoon made the world feel less empty. By the time the stars began to gather above the desert, Kehasti Redmoon and Evelyn Marris had reached the canyon he called Sana'i, the place of echoes. The air grew colder there, the wind carrying faint murmurs that seemed almost human. The moon hung low and wide, bleeding silver across the stones. Evelyn shivered as they entered the narrow pass. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and kind of terrifying. Kehasti's voice was low. Both things often walked together. They led their horses into a small hollow carved by centuries of rain. The cliffs loomed above them, painted with petroglyphs, spirals, suns, and the faces of warriors long gone. Evelyn ran her hand across the carvings, tracing the lines. "What do they mean?" she asked. "They tell stories," he said. "This one," he pointed to a circle broken by lightning, "is about a man who defied his fate. The storm struck him, but he rose again." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Sounds like you." He didn't answer, but his eyes caught the moonlight in a way that made him look carved from the same stone. He unpacked his few belongings, then lit a small fire between them. The flames danced against the canyon walls, making the ancient figures seem alive again. She sat near him, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Back there. You move like you've done this all your life. Fighting, surviving. You must have lost more than you say." He stirred the fire with a stick, watching the embers drift upward. "When you live long enough, loss becomes a companion. You stop naming it." Evelyn looked into the flames. "And yet you still fight." "I fight because I still breathe," he said quietly. "And the spirits of my people demand breath until the end." The wind rose, carrying a soft, haunting hum through the canyon. Evelyn turned her head. "What is that?" "The canyon speaks," he murmured. "When the wind passes through the old graves, it carries the voices of the lost." She frowned, half uneasy, half mesmerized. "Do you believe they can still hear you?" He looked up at the stars. "They hear everything. The dead listen better than the living." A silence stretched between them. The fire cracked. Evelyn studied him, the scars, the stillness, the strange dignity that wrapped around him like invisible armor. "Finally," she said softly, "you talk like a man who's already halfway to the other side." His gaze shifted to her, steady and deep. "Maybe I am." She held his stare. "And yet here you are, saving a woman who didn't ask for it." His lips curved slightly. "You didn't ask, but the fire did." She blinked. "The fire?" He nodded toward the flames. "God told me you were not done living." Evelyn laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You Apache men sure know how to confuse a woman." "Only those who listen," he replied, voice low and rhythmic, almost like prayer. For a while neither spoke. The moon climbed higher and the night grew colder. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter, but her hand still trembled. She tried to hide it, but Kehasti noticed. Without a word, he reached into his pack and handed her a small pouch. "Herbs," he said, "for warmth and for pain." She opened it, sniffed the scent sharp and earthy. "You know medicine too?" "My mother was a healer," he said, "before the soldiers burned her lodge." The way he said it so calm, so hollow made her chest ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He gave a faint nod. "Don't be. She walks in the wind now. When I breathe, I carry her voice." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "You lost everything, didn't you?" His eyes met hers again, and for a fleeting second, the mask slipped. She saw it, the pain, the fire, the years of loneliness that had hardened into silence. "Yes," he said. "Everything but the memories that hurt the most." The flames flickered between them, and the canyon wind carried the echo of something like a sigh-soft feminine, distant. Evelyn glanced around, startled. "Kehasti, did you hear that?" He didn't move. "Yes, what was it?" He stared into the fire. "The woman I failed. Her name was Lenari, the one I could not save." Evelyn felt her heart twist. "She still calls to you?" He nodded once. "Until I make peace with what I left behind." The silence that followed was heavy, fragile. Evelyn looked into the fire, then at him. "Maybe peace isn't something you find out here. Maybe it's something you build. With someone else." Kehasti turned his head slightly, his dark hair brushing his shoulders. The look he gave her wasn't one of surprise, it was one of quiet recognition. For the first time since she'd met him, his voice softened into something human, almost tender. "Maybe," he said, "but I have not slept beside a woman since the years. And I fear I've forgotten how." Evelyn swallowed hard, her eyes on the flames. The night pressed closer on them, and the canyon whispered like it was listening. The morning sun crept over the crimson ridges, painting the desert in gold. The fire had long died out, but thin curls of smoke still rose where the embers smoldered. Evelyn Marris stirred under the blanket, her mind fogged by dreams of thunder, arrows, and voices calling her name from somewhere beyond the wind. When she opened her eyes, Kehasti Redmoon was already awake, standing on a flat rock, his long black hair catching the early light, the tribal jewelry at his neck gleaming like small stars. He looked like part of the land itself, born of its dust and shadows. "You rise with the sun," Evelyn said softly, brushing dust from her skirt. Kehasti turned, his eyes calm yet unreadable. "The desert does not wait for those who sleep." There was a strength in his tone, not arrogance, but truth. It reminded Evelyn that this man had lived his whole life in a world ruled by survival and silence. She stood, feeling the chill still clinging to her bones. "I didn't sleep much," she admitted. The wind sounded like people whispering. Kehasti nodded once. "They are. The old ones. They walk when the wind moves fast. You heard them because they chose to speak to you." Evelyn smiled nervously. "Or maybe I was just afraid." He looked at her then for longer than before. "Fear is not weakness. It is the voice that reminds us we are still alive." For a moment, she had no words. The desert around them was endless, yet it felt as though the space between them was the only thing that truly existed. Kehasti began gathering his things, tying a leather strap around his arm, checking the small pouch that hung from his belt. "We leave before the sun climbs higher," he said. "The soldiers will come again. They do not forgive." Evelyn followed his movements, realizing the weight of what he'd risked to save her the night before. "Why did you help me, Kehasti? You didn't even know me." He paused, the wind tugging at his hair. "You looked like someone who once mattered to me." That sentence hit her harder than she expected. "Someone you lost?" Kehasti's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the land rippled with heat. "She was from your world." Pale hands, soft words. "The world took her from mine." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She wanted to ask more, but his silence told her enough. They began walking through the valley, each step stirring up red dust that clung to their boots. The air grew heavier as the day unfolded, the sky sharp and brilliant. Evelyn's thoughts wandered about the war between worlds, about the endless cycles of blood and revenge, and about this man who seemed both a warrior and a ghost. At a narrow ravine, Kehasti stopped. He knelt, pressing his hand against a smooth rock surface covered in faded carvings, deer, storms, suns, and warriors. "This is the mark of my ancestors," he murmured. "They fought for the earth, for water, for their children. Now we fight for memory." Evelyn crouched beside him. "And what about peace?" she asked quietly. Kehasti's jaw tightened. "Peace is a dream, one that dies when men forget honor." Evelyn felt his pain in those words, the centuries of struggle carved into his bloodline. She reached out instinctively, placing her hand over his. "Maybe dreams don't have to die." Kehasti looked down at her hand on his, then slowly met her gaze. His voice softened, but his eyes still burned like embers. "You speak like one who has not seen the world's cruelty." "Oh, I have," she replied, her voice steady. "That's why I still hope." For a long while, neither spoke. The wind moved through the canyon, scattering grains of sand that shimmered like gold dust. In that silence, something shifted, not quite trust, but something close. Finally, Kehasti rose. "We move north. There is a place where the earth bleeds silver from the stones. You will be safe there." Evelyn stood beside him, watching the horizon stretch endlessly ahead. "And what about you?" He turned slightly, his profile strong against the morning light. "A warrior is never safe," he said simply. And as they walked onward, Evelyn realized she wasn't following him just for safety anymore. She was following him because something in his spirit had called out to her own, something that told her their fates were already woven together by the desert wind. The desert was quieter than ever that night, so quiet Evelyn could hear her heartbeat echo against the canyon walls. Above her, the moon hung full and red, spilling a strange glow over the land. The sand shimmered like embers, and a coyote's cry broke the silence before fading into the distance. Kehasti Redmoon stood at the edge of a cliff, the wind pulling at his long black hair, his bare chest gleaming under the blood moon's light. His turquoise and bone jewelry caught the red glow, making him look like some ancient spirit born from the earth itself. Evelyn approached slowly, her boots crunching softly over the sand. "You said this land remembers," she whispered. "What does it remember tonight?" Kehasti didn't turn. His voice was low and filled with a tired wisdom. "It remembers pain and promises." Evelyn stopped beside him, her gaze following his toward the horizon where the mountains looked like sleeping beasts. "You mean the promise you made to your people?" He finally turned toward her, eyes burning like dark amber. "No, Evelyn Marris. The promise I made to myself." A breeze swept through the canyon, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and rain. Evelyn's heart tightened. She knew what that meant. The cavalry. They'd found their trail again. "They're coming," she said, reaching instinctively for her revolver. Kehasti didn't move. "Let them." His tone was calm, too calm. A man cannot run from his past forever. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then let me fight with you." His eyes softened then, the fierce warrior slipping away, revealing something deeply human beneath. "I've fought all my life," he said quietly. "For land, for pride, for blood that no longer matters. But you fight for something different." Evelyn's throat tightened. "And what's that?" He looked at her, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "For tomorrow." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The moon painted the world in crimson, and the silence between them became almost sacred. Then, in a voice low and rough, Kehasti added, "I haven't slept beside a woman since the years before the raids. Since the world turned cold." Evelyn's eyes glistened with firelight. She stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth of his skin, the pulse in his throat. "You don't have to say more," she whispered. "I understand." But Kehasti shook his head slowly. "You don't. The dead visit me when I close my eyes. My wife, my brother. The ones who trusted me to lead them into safety and never came back." Evelyn's voice was soft as a prayer. "You can't live forever in the graves of the past." He studied her face, searching for something, faith, maybe, or forgiveness. And in that fragile moment, the warrior seemed to crumble. He dropped to one knee, scooping a handful of red sand and letting it fall through his fingers. "This land has taken everything from me," he said. "But tonight, it gives something back." Evelyn knelt beside him. "What's that?" He turned to her fully, his eyes reflecting the fire and moonlight together. "You." A gunshot cracked through the air, echoing across the canyon. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her revolver, but Kehasti grabbed her wrist. "No," he said. "Stay behind me." 3 riders appeared on the ridge silhouettes against the blood moon. The same men who had burned the trading post, who had hunted them since Silver Creek. Kehasti rose, tall and unflinching, his muscles taut, his breath steady. "It ends tonight," he said. Evelyn stood behind him, torn between fear and awe as she watched the Apache warrior step forward into the red dust, bow in hand, spirit blazing like a storm given human form. When the riders fired again, the desert came alive with sound bullets cracking, arrows hissing, and the echo of fury that had slept for too long. By the time the moon sank lower, the ridge was silent again. The wind howled, carrying the smell of gunpowder and blood. Kehasti stood, breathing hard, one arm bleeding but still gripping his bow. Evelyn rushed to him, clutching his face with trembling hands. "You're hurt," she cried. He smiled faintly, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "A wound is a small price for keeping a promise." She helped him to the ground, pressing her forehead against his. The fire flickered nearby, and the red moonlight softened. For the first time in years, Kehasti closed his eyes not in fear or grief, but in peace. And beside him, Evelyn whispered, "Then let this night be the beginning, not the end." He nodded weakly. "If the dawn comes for me, let it find me beside you." The wind carried their words into the canyon, where echoes of war and love became one, and the desert finally slept. The dawn came quietly, like a soft confession. Pale gold crept over the mesas, brushing the desert with fragile warmth. The storm had passed, and so had the night of fire and blood. Evelyn Marris sat beside Kehasti Redmoon, who lay on a blanket of woven horsehide near the dying embers of the fire. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath deep, deliberate. His bow rested at his side, the string broken, and his turquoise jewelry glimmered faintly in the first rays of morning. She pressed a damp cloth against the wound on his shoulder, her hands trembling but steady. "You should have let me take that shot," she whispered. Kehasti's eyes opened, dark and calm as riverstone. "If I had, you wouldn't be here to scold me." Evelyn smiled faintly despite the ache in her chest. "You call this scolding?" He grunted softly, half amusement, half pain. "Among my people, when a woman tends a man's wound with fire in her voice, we call it love." Her hand froze. "Love?" she repeated, unsure whether to laugh or cry. He turned his head toward her. "You came into the desert with no reason to trust me. You could have left a dozen times, but you stayed. That is what love looks like in a land like this." Evelyn looked down, unable to hold his gaze. "I stayed because something in your silence reminded me of my own. You were broken, Kehasti, and so was I." The wind whispered over the sand, carrying the scent of mesquite and rain. He reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek, rough and warm. "Then maybe the broken pieces fit together," he said softly. Tears filled her eyes. She tried to blink them away, but one slipped free. He caught it with his thumb, as if even her tears were something sacred. "I used to think the world owed me peace," he said, his voice quiet as the wind. "But peace is not given. It's found in places we never thought to look." Evelyn's lips trembled. "Then you found yours?" He smiled faintly. "Perhaps. If this is my last sunrise, I'd rather meet it beside you than in any warrior's dream." A hush settled between them. The world seemed to pause. The sun's first full light broke across the canyon, painting the rocks gold and crimson. The river below shimmered like glass. Evelyn leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. "You're not dying," she whispered fiercely. "You hear me? You're not." He chuckled softly, the sound barely a breath. "Even if I do, my spirit will follow the wind, and the wind will find you." Her heart clenched. "Don't speak like that." But Kehasti's eyes were full of peace, not fear. "You said it yourself, Evelyn Marris. We can't live forever in the graves of the past." She nodded, choking back a sob. "Then live in the present with me?" He smiled again, the faintest curve of his lips. "Then tell me something real." She hesitated. "Like what?" "Tell me what you dream of when the world is quiet." Evelyn took a shaky breath. "I dream of a little cabin near the edge of the desert. Horses grazing by the river. No guns, no ghosts. Just peace." Kehasti's eyes softened, and for the first time his voice carried warmth. "Then build it," he said. "And when the wind touches your door at night, you'll know I kept my promise." Her tears fell freely now. She held his hand tight, feeling his strength fading but his spirit steady as stone. "I'll build it," she swore, "and I'll wait for the wind." He closed his eyes, a small smile still on his lips. Then the desert has done its work. As the sun rose higher, silence fell again, soft, deep, eternal. A hawk circled above, its cry echoing across the canyon. Hours later, Evelyn buried him beneath a lone mesquite tree overlooking the river. She marked the grave with his bow and laid one turquoise bead upon the mound of earth. That night, when the wind rose, it moved through the canyon like a whisper, strong, steady, alive. Evelyn stood at her small fire, eyes closed, listening, and somewhere in that endless sigh of air, she swore she heard his voice say, "The dawn found us, Evelyn Marris." It found us both. The fire crackled, and for the first time in years, she smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because love had left its trail through the desert and she would never lose her way again.